Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to another video. In today's video, we'll be going over Firebase version 9 and React Native. I'll be putting out this video in two parts. In this first part of the video, we'll be covering Firebase authentication and firestore. And then in the second video, we'll be taking a look at storage. So I've got the default React Native app running here in my Android emulator. If you're working on a M1 machine and you need to set up an Android emulator, you can check out a recent video I did where I go through how to set up an Android emulator on the new Android Studio ARM preview. So let's start off by cleaning this up. So we'll remove all of this. And we'll clean up the styling as well. So we'll leave a basic page there. So let's start off by setting up our Firebase project. So I'll head over to Firebase. And then I'll create a new project. Let's call it Firebase version 9. Then click continue. We don't need Google Analytics. We'll go ahead and create the project. Now, when using Firebase in React Native, there are two ways of going about it. You can install the official Firebase package directly from this NPM site here, or you could go about it using the React Native Firebase package. So those are the two ways of going about it. In this video, I'll be using this Firebase package here from NPM. I normally use this Firebase or React Native Firebase when I'm building like social authentication. So if I need like Facebook authentication or Apple authentication like I did in a previous video, I'll probably go with React Native Firebase. So then click continue and then we'll set up a web app. We'll just call it React Native app. And then we'll just install the Firebase package. So this will install the updated Firebase version 9 in our application. And then in VS Code, I'll create a new folder where I'll store my Firebase config file. So I'll create a folder called Firebase. And then in there, I'll create a new file, call it Firebase config. .js. If you've checked out my previous React Native videos, I also went through how to set up Firebase in a previous video. It's more or less the same process here. And then we'll just copy this. Let's just remove these comments here. So in the previous Firebase and React Native video that I did, the setup was quite different. So if we just go back to that video, which would be this one here. If we just scroll forward, so here, as you can see, when we wanted to export Firebase, we'll just call export Firebase. So now with version 9, it's a bit different. So if we go to the documentation, so the initialization, as you can see, is a bit different. You have to import initialize app instead, where previously would import Firebase and then call firebase.initialize app, and then would pass our Firebase config. Now here you just call initialize app from Firebase / Firebase app, which is what we have there. And then you initialize your app by just simply calling initialize app, and then you pass along Firebase config. Now to set up authentication, if we scroll down here, you'll see that we need to, for example, with get firestore, this is something I highlighted in a previous video that I did for React as well. If you want to set up firestore, you'll need to import get firestore, and then here at the bottom, you create a new variable, and then you'll pass your app in get firestore. So same process with authentication, you'd call get auth, and then here you'll create another variable, let's say authentication, which would be equal to get auth, and then you'd pass your app in there. So if you want to set up authentication, we'll just say Firebase and then just Google Firebase authentication. Then just click view docs here. And then we'll go under web. And just click on get started. So here, as I said, we'll first need to import get auth. So let's go ahead and import this entire line here. So we'll paste this in here in our Firebase config, whereas previously you would have this like in our main application, but instead here we'll put it in in our Firebase config file. And then I don't think we need this for now. Let's remove that. So under get auth, what we need to do now is create a new variable called auth in this case, or we'll call it authentication. So we'll say authentication. And then inside this bracket, so just as I mentioned here, where we have get firestore, we need to pass our app that we just created, which will be this line here. So we just need to pass that in our get auth, and then we can export authentication. So I'll call export. There we go. And then we can import authentication in our application here, in our main app file. Now let me just run metro once more, npm start, and then from here we can import our authentication from Firebase. So let's say import authentication from Firebase. Then let's just add two text inputs here. Let's remove these for now, which we're not using. So I'll import text input. And I also need a button. So we'll have two text inputs. The first one will be for our username. So we'll add a placeholder text there. Say username. And password. Let's just reload this. So we have username and password. And then I'll add a button here at the bottom. And we'll just have a title that says sign in. Right. So there we go. And then I'll also create a state. Let me first remove this. And then I'll also import useState. And then I'll create a state called is signed in. And we'll set this to false. And we'll create two new states as well for our text inputs. So the first one will be username, then set username. And then we'll have one for password as well. we'll set our values for this text input. So for the first value, it will be our username. And then for our password, we'll set our value to password, basically referencing the two states that we created here. Now for our password, as you can see, when I try to type it in, it's basically showing the text. Before we fix that, let's first add our own onChange events. So this will be onChange text. So we'll get the text that the user has typed in, and then we'll set that as our new updated state. So we'll call set username, and then we'll pass on the text. And then we'll do the same for our password. Then instead of set username, we'll call set password. So now if I type it in, as you can see, things are working fine, but we want to hide the password. So to do that, we'll just add another value here called secure text entry and set that to true. Now our password is hidden. And then for our button, lastly, we need to add our onClick event. So when the user is done setting their username and password, we'll want to sign in. And to do that, we'll just call onPress, and we'll create a function here saying sign in. So sign in user. And then now we imported authentication here. So what we're going to have to do, let's just head back to the documentation. So here we'll have to just import create user with email and password. So this is what we need to import in our app file here. So let's import that, and then when we create a user now, actually let's change this to register. Register. So it's register user. And then we'll call create user with email and password. And then if we just head back to the documentation, first thing we need to pass is authentication or auth, which we imported from our Firebase config. So we'll first pass that. And then the next thing we need to pass is an email along with the password. So our email, let's change username instead to email. So there we go. So we'll pass along our email, and then for password, it'll be password. Then we'll get a result back, which will console log. And we'll also catch any errors. Okay, so if we head back to our Firebase console under authentication, let's go ahead and just enable this before we continue. Say email and password, enable, click save. And then under users, we don't have any users at the moment. So let me try and create a new user. So chjalom@gmail.com. And then I'll enter password 123456. And then click register. Obviously, we don't have any loading indicator at the moment. Let's see if that was successful. Okay, so user has been created. We're getting the result back here. Now, if I head back to my console here and just click reload here, we have the new user created. So there we go. So a new user has been created. So ideally, you would have some sort of response back from the application once you've created the user. So you'd have a loading indicator, and then after that, you display the message once the user has been created. And for that, you can check out my other React Native series where I go over building all of that from start to finish. And then once the user is actually signed in, we can set the signed in state to true. So since we've already created the user, let's change this method to sign in. So it's called sign in user. Then let's remove that. And then we'll change our button to sign in. Now let's see what's required now here to sign in a user. So signing in existing users, instead of create user with email and password, we'll need to import sign in with email and password. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll replace create user with email and password with sign in with email and password instead. And I think the process is pretty much the same. We'll then call sign in with email and password, and then the first thing we need to pass is again authentication, which we imported from our Firebase config file. And then from there we need to pass our email and then pass along our password. And then we'll call then. This will bring back a result if it's successful. And then if it is successful, let's set the signed in state to true. So set signed in to true, or catch for any errors. And then down here on our button, so if the user is signed in, we want to display a sign out button. To do that, we'll just add a condition here. So we'll say if user is signed in, right? Instead of the sign in button, we'll display a sign out button, and we'll add a function for that just now. So it'll be sign out if the user is signed in, and then we'll create a method called sign out user. And then to sign out a user, I think that's also different this time around. So if we just go on to Google here, let's see if we have sign out here. Let's see. So let's just Google that. So it'll be Firebase sign out web. Okay, so we'll need to import sign out from Firebase auth. And then once again, we'll call sign out. And then we'll need to pass authentication again, which we imported from Firebase config. So we'll pass that there. And then if the user is signed out, if that is successful, then we set our state signed in to false. Then we can also add a catch there. So now let's try signing in and signing out. Then let me just put my terminal next to me there. So we have a user created already. This is the email address. The password was 123456. And then if I click sign in, now the user is signed in. As you can see, the button there, it says sign out this time around. So as you can see, we added this code. If the user is signed in, it'll say sign out. And then if the user signs out, it'll change the state again to sign in. So if I click sign out, the button then changes to sign in. So obviously in a real application, you basically have several pages navigating. So once the user is signed in, you then navigate the user to the other pages where they can view all the other content a sign-in user would view. And then if they signed out, you just bring them back to the sign-in screen. So this is just a basic run through of some of the changes in Firebase version 9. And then next up, let's take a look at Firestore. So let's just head back to our console here and then create a new database. So let's create a database, then click enable. And then while that is being set up, we need to import get Firestore collection and get docs. So we'll copy this line here. This time around, we can get rid of sign in with email and password. We'll keep authentication. Let's remove these states. We'll also remove all these two functions that we have here. We'll just keep one button, then the rest can go. We'll just call it get data, and then we'll have a function that's called get data as well. Let's just center our button. Style equals styles dot main container. Then justify content, we'll center that, and then yeah, there we go. So we'll just have our button centered. Then let's head back to our console. So our collection has been created. So let's have a look at the docs here. So to get a database, we'll need to call get Firestore first and then pass along our app. So this get Firestore needs to be imported in our Firebase config. So let's have that there. Then we can remove it from here. And then we'll export, say db. db is equal to get Firestore. And then we'll pass along app. And then let's go ahead and import db in our app.js file. So there we go. And then what next do we have? So let's create a collection. Here we have cities. So let's create a collection called cities. And then next, now we'll create the default one and then say city underscore name Johannesburg. Okay, so that will be our first city. Then we'll add another one. I'll just have an auto ID, city name, Cape Town, and save. So we've added a list of cities. So our function here needs to be an async function. So let's go ahead and add that. And then we'll call cities collection. And then we'll pass db, which we just imported, and then the collection name. In this case, our collection name is also cities. And then from here, we have a city snapshot. So let's import that as well. So basically, our city snapshot is getting all the docs from our cities collection. So as you can see in our Firestore, we have a collection here called cities with 2 documents. So this should return back 2 documents. So then from this city snapshot, let's just head back to the documentation, what we get. So to get the list of all the cities, we'll need to create a new variable. So it's city list, and then this will basically call the city snapshot, and then we'll get all the dogs and create a list of them. Let's print this out. Console.log city list. So let's see what happens when we click get data. Let's just restart Metro here. So npm start. Then reload our application. There we go, and then get data. So it says permission denied. Let's see what error we're facing here. Let's just check our rules here. Okay, let's just fix our rules here. So we'll update our rules and we'll just say allow read and write, and then remove this if false. Then let's just publish that. Okay, let's just give this one more go. So get data, and there we go. So we're getting a list of all the cities. So we have city name Johannesburg and city name Cape Town. And then let's try and maybe add another city to our list. So let's go to Firebase, Cloud Firestore, and see how we go about doing that. So under add and manage data, let's click on add data. So I guess all we need is this line here. So we need to basically import and it seems like you can import from two locations. So there's a light version of Firebase this time around. So you can import Firebase Firestore Lite, or you can simply import Firebase Firestore. So we'll need to import doc and then set doc from Firebase. So I think this should also be in the light version as well. Let's see if we have it there. So we can import doc there and also set doc. And then we can remove this line instead. And then let's remove this bit. We'll just create a new variable here called city. And then, so this would maybe be a state that the user would type in. So it would be an input that you set as a state that the user types in. We'll just hand code this. We'll create a new city, call it Pretoria. So our new city will be Pretoria. And then we'll call, let's copy this entire line here. So add a new document in collection cities. Then let's paste it there. So to go about adding a doc, we'll just call await set doc, and then we'll pass along our DB, which we imported from Firebase config. And then the collection we're looking for is cities. And then let's see what this is, this third parameter that we're passing here. Okay, so I think this is the ID or something. So here we generated, let's just go back to Firestore data. Okay, so I think that would be the document. So this would be the document name. Let's just give it a random name. So we'll say random doc. And then we only have one attribute, which is city name. Then our city name will be the one we set up there. Then we'll just change this to set data instead of get data. Then let's see, can't find variables, set data. Let's just change our function name, so set data as well. Okay, there we go. And then let's try and see if this works. So if I click set data, and there we go. So we have random doc and our city has been added. So that's pretty much the basics with the new Firebase version 9. So it's slightly different from the previous version, but more or less the functionality is all the same. So in the next video, I'll be taking a look at Firebase storage with React Native, and perhaps later on we'll also tackle machine learning as well. yeah, but for now, that's it. Be sure to check out my React Native Augmented Reality series if you're interested in that. Cheers.